Imagine a country whose economy was just completely shattered in the 1990s, like experiencing the kind of structural collapse that usually takes generations to repair.
Yeah, the kind that just rewrites a whole society.
Exactly. Yet today, for those of you listening, this same nation sits at #1 globally for poverty elimination. #1. They registered a microscopic, multidimensional poverty index score, an MPI score of 0.001.
Which is, I mean, it's basically a rounding error away from absolute zero.
It's wild. That is a statistical anomaly that essentially breaks all our traditional macroeconomic models. So today, we are opening the books on Azerbaijan.
Right, because when you see a number like that in global development metrics, it forces you to completely reassess, how a middle-income country is actually managing its internal resources.
Spot on. So we have this massive data set in front of us today for our deep dive. It's the Azerbaijan Global Development Dynamics Deep Analysis Report spanning from 1990 to 2023. And our mission for you today is to basically dissect these 3 decades of statistical evidence.
Which is a lot of data.
Oh, it's a mountain of data. But we're trying to answer a single, incredibly complex question. Is Azerbaijan the ultimate global blueprint for poverty elimination? Or are we looking at a vastly complex development paradox?
It's a great question. And to figure that out, we are deploying a very specific set of analytical lenses today. We have to move far beyond simplistic metrics like, say, just gross domestic product.
Because GDP doesn't tell the whole story, right?
Not at all. I mean, relying solely on GDP to gauge national progress is like trying to diagnose a patient's overall health by only looking at their daily caloric intake.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it tells you absolutely nothing about how those resources are utilized internally. So the sources we're utilizing today provide 5 core indices. These give us a much more granular view of the society.
So let's lay those out for the listeners.
Sure. First, we're using the Human Development Index, the HDI. That captures the baseline, right?
Yeah.
Life expectancy, education, and income.
Right, the classic UN metric.
Exactly. But crucially, we immediately filter that through the inequality-adjusted HDI, the IHDI, and that exposes the true distribution of that growth.
Because, I mean, growth means nothing if it's entirely captured by, the top 1%.
Precisely. Then we apply the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI, to examine the absolute floor of society. We're talking about the lived reality of the poorest of the poor.
Okay.
Following that, we introduce a rigorous gendered perspective. We use the Gender Development Index, the GDI, and the Gender Inequality Index, the GII, to basically evaluate structural fairness.
How the two halves of the population are actually faring.
Right. And finally, we adjust all of this for planetary impact using the PHDI, basically asking, what environmental price was paid for all this rapid development.
Okay, so those 5 indices are going to guide us today. But to really understand that 0.001 poverty score we mentioned at the top, we have to start by analyzing their broader 30-year growth curve.
We have to look at the macro picture first.
Right, moving from the macro picture of wealth accumulation to how it's actually distributed. And the data from the early 90s is just staggering.
It's genuinely grim.
Yeah. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Azerbaijan's gross national income per capita was sitting around $10,332 in 1990. But by 1995, it had completely collapsed down to $4,046.
And we really need to pause on that for a second, because a contraction of that magnitude isn't just an economic recession. It is a profound societal trauma.
Half their wealth just gone.
Right. Supply chains sever overnight. Heavy industries that relied on a centralized transcontinental Soviet grid suddenly, they have no buyers and no raw materials. Hyperinflation sets in. That wipes out the savings of whatever middle class existed, and state institutions struggle to fund even the most basic public services. When you look at their HDI in 1995, it reflected this devastation.
What was the number?
It was sitting at a middling 0.61, which ranked them 91st globally.
Wow, so really middle of the pack, leaning downward. But then fast forward to 2023, and the turnaround is structural. Their Human Development Index climbed to a highly impressive 0.79.
That's a massive leap.
It is. That represents a 27.7% growth trajectory over nearly 30 years. It decisively surpasses the 2023 global average, which is 0.756, and their gross national income per capita. It reached $20,668.
Which is slightly above the global average of $20,327.
Exactly. Even after enduring the massive global shocks of 2020, I mean, they dropped down to something like $17,000 during the pandemic, but bounced right back.
And the mechanism of that recovery is really where the data gets fascinating.
Let's unpack this, because this is the crazy part.
Yeah. Often when a nation experiences rapid economic growth like climbing back from a $4,000 GNI to over $20,000, that velocity inherently drives massive inequality.
Right, the rich get richer.
Exactly. You see the rapid accumulation of capital by a tiny elite, the people who control the newly privatized industries, basically. Meanwhile, the rural populations or the working class are just left behind.
Yeah, the visual manifestation for that is usually like glittering skyscrapers erected right next to sprawling, unserviced shantytowns.
That's the classic visual, yes. But the data shows Azerbaijan somehow bypassed that classic skyscraper and shantytown dynamic.
And this is where the inequality-adjusted HDI metric comes in, right?
Yes. It reveals a massive divergence from the global norm. Globally, the average loss in human development due to systemic inequality is a staggering 22.0%.
So wait, 22%?
Yeah. The world is essentially leaving nearly a quarter of its human potential on the table, just due to unfair distribution.
That is depressing, but Azerbaijan's HDI loss due to inequality is an incredibly low 6.8%.
Which leaves them with an IHDI score of 0.735. And that low loss percentage is perhaps the most critical data point in understanding their social stability.
Okay, let's unpack this for you guys listening. Think of a national economy as a complex municipal water grid.
I like this analogy.
Right, so the central reservoir represents the total national wealth and development potential. In most developing nations, the grid is flawed. Because of, say, corrupt diversion valves, lack of rural infrastructure, and systemic bottlenecks, they lose 22% of their water pressure before it ever reaches the residential neighborhoods.
It spills out before the people can drink it.
Exactly. But Azerbaijan engineered a socioeconomic grid with only a 6.8% pressure drop. The foundational elements are actually reaching the end user.
And that equitable distribution of baseline human development acts as a massive socioeconomic buffer.
Oh, so?
Well, when a state successfully delivers foundational healthcare, basic education, and infrastructure across the board, it creates what I like to call an inequality shield.
Oh, an inequality shield. I like that.
Right. Even if the upper middle class is accumulating wealth faster, the working class doesn't experience the kind of profound relative deprivation that usually destabilizes societies.
So they aren't necessarily equal in wealth, but they are equal in basics.
Precisely. The rising tide might not lift all boats equally, but it is definitively raising the absolute water level for everyone.
Okay, that rising water level leads us directly into the most provocative statistic in this entire report. If the baseline is so equitable and the distribution grid is that efficient, what does the absolute bottom of the economic ladder look like?
This is where we get to the MPI data.
Right. The Multidimensional Poverty Index data for 2023 places Azerbaijan at the absolute global pinnacle, number 1, with that score of 0.00006, or roughly 0.0001.
It's an incredible figure.
I have to admit, when I first read that in the sources, my immediate instinct was deep skepticism. I mean, utopias don't exist, right? So what is this metric actually capturing? Is a score of 0.001 even practically possible, or is this just a quirk of what MPI measures?
Skepticism is definitely the correct analytical approach here. The key is understanding the methodology of the MPI.
Walk us through it.
It does not measure relative poverty. It doesn't ask whether someone feels poor compared to their neighbor with a newer car. It measures severe, overlapping, acute destitution. It evaluates specific household deprivations across health, education, and living standards. We were talking about whether a family has a dirt floor, whether they lack basic sanitation, or if they're forced to cook with solid fuels like dung or wood indoors.
So it's measuring actual physical survival.
Mhm.
And the breakdown of their remaining microscopic poverty score is really revealing. The standard of living indicators contribute virtually nothing to their index anymore.
Right, the numbers are tiny.
Yeah, a lack of cooking fuel contributes only 1.4% to their total poverty score. A lack of basic sanitation is just 5.5%. And a lack of safe drinking water contributes only 5.8%.
Those specific percentages prove something huge. They prove that the physical environment of extreme deprivation has been systematically dismantled.
Because you can't fake plumbing.
Exactly. Delivering sanitation and drinking water requires massive, capital-intensive public works projects. You're laying pipes, building treatment plants, maintaining power grids. The state has clearly succeeded in its fundamental duty to deliver hard assets to its population. The structural eradication of physical infrastructural poverty is nearly complete.
So they've successfully poured a flawless concrete foundation and framed the walls of the house. That covers the physical environment. But a score of 0.001 isn't absolute zero.
No, it's not.
There are still vulnerable populations, so if they aren't suffering from a lack of running water or electricity, what constitutes the remaining severe poverty in the country? Where are the pain points?
The remaining deprivation is highly concentrated in just two areas. Nutrition contributes 25.4% to their overall MPI, and school attendance is the largest single contributor at 28.7%.
Wow, over half of their extreme poverty is tied to just two factors: kids missing school and nutritional deficits.
Yeah, and this illustrates a profound shift in the nature of modern development challenges.
How do you mean?
Well, once a government masters the macro physics of poverty, building the roads, wiring the grid, constructing the clinics, the remaining challenges transition into the realm of sociocultural complexity,
Oh, I see.
right? Building a school is a straightforward capital allocation problem.
Yeah.
You write the check, the building goes up. But ensuring every marginalized child attends that school every single day, that requires complex, localized social interventions.
It requires addressing things like domestic labor expectations,
Yeah.
or transportation for remote villages, or even cultural attitudes toward education in specific subcommunities.
Exactly. And nutrition operates on the exact same logic.
Because it's not a famine.
Right, it's not a famine. You can ensure the national agricultural output is high and the supermarkets are fully stocked. But nutritional deficits at the extreme margins, they often stem from highly localized issues.
Like what?
It might be specific dietary habits, or a lack of maternal knowledge regarding infant weaning, or isolated economic distress within specific family units.
So the policy tools required to fix a drafty window in a specific room of the house are entirely different from the tools used to pour the foundation.
That's a perfect way to look at it. Broad infrastructure spending won't fix targeted nutritional deficits. It requires surgical, localized interventions.
Okay, I want to pull on that thread regarding school attendance. Since keeping the most marginalized children in the classroom represents their biggest remaining vulnerability at the absolute bottom of the ladder, we really need to examine what the education picture looks like for the broader population.
Let's do it.
Specifically, I want to look at the output of that education system through the lens of gender, because this is where the data tells a story of incredible triumph that just slams into a wall of confusion.
It really does. The education metrics for women in Azerbaijan are genuinely extraordinary. In 2023, the mean years of schooling for women reached 10.9 years.
And for context, what's the global average?
The global average for women sits at 8.41 years.
Oh, wow. So they're outpacing the global female average by 30.5%.
Huge margin.
It is. Over a lifetime, an extra 2.5 years of formal education isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It fundamentally alters an individual's cognitive development, their critical thinking capacity, their interaction with state institutions, and, their earning potential.
Absolutely. Furthermore, their expected years of schooling for women is 12.94 years. So they have functionally achieved educational parity with men, whose mean years of schooling sits at 11.16.
Okay, so the input side of the human capital equation is functioning at an elite level. The state has effectively removed the foundational barriers to female development.
And this early stage equity is reflected in their Gender Inequality Index, the GII. Azerbaijan scores a highly competitive 0.315.
Which is good.
Oh, it's great. It vastly outperforms the global average of 0.455 and ranks them 80th globally.
But the paradox emerges when we track what happens after these highly educated women leave the academic environment and actually enter the economy.
This is where it gets complicated.
Because despite having a near-equal education with men, the income disparity is glaring. The gross national income per capita for women is $17,656, but for men, it is $23,030.
Yeah, that's a significant gap. And the labor market dynamics further sharpen this contradiction.
Right, because they are working.
Very much so. Female labor force participation is exceptionally active at 61.9%. That is completely crushing the global average of 48.5%.
Right. So these highly educated women are not staying home. They are actively participating in the formal economy.
Yet, when we analyze the apex of structural power, the representation just collapses. Women hold only 18.6% of parliamentary seats.
Wow. And the global average is what?
The global average is 26.5%.
So they are far behind there. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the structural misalignment here is fascinating. Here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. It's like Azerbaijan built a massive high-speed fiber optic network, a high-speed highway for women in education and basic employment.
It's a highway, yes.
The data is flowing at unprecedented speeds. But the government, or maybe the corporate culture, has placed a massive toll booth, a severe bandwidth throttle, at the router level, right before the executive suites and the parliament doors.
That bandwidth throttle is clearly visible in the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
What are the numbers there?
Their score is 0.983, which ranks them 74th. The massive educational parity keeps the score relatively high, but the income gap acts as a severe drag.
Right.
The economy readily absorbs female labor, which explains that 61.9% participation rate, but it fundamentally struggles to translate that highly educated labor into executive economic yield and high-level decision-making power.
So it begs the question, why does a society actively educate its daughters to outpace the world, only to sideline them when it comes to legislative power and peak earning potential?
It's a profound paradox. It reveals the persistent friction between state-provided capability and culturally gated opportunity.
Okay, break that down.
Well, the state has provided the capability through robust public education. However, opportunity at the highest levels is often dictated by institutional inertia, corporate cultures, and deeply entrenched social norms surrounding the division of unpaid domestic labor.
Ah, the second shift.
Precisely the concept. When women are expected to bear the overwhelming brunt of domestic care and child-rearing, even while working full-time in the formal economy, it naturally limits their trajectory into hyper-demanding executive roles or, time-intensive political campaigns.
Right, there are only so many hours in the day.
Exactly. The glass ceiling isn't necessarily a formal law on the books. It is the cumulative weight of uncompensated domestic expectations, preventing them from competing equally for peak professional roles.
That makes so much sense. But, as crucial as analyzing boardrooms and parliamentary seats is, true female empowerment doesn't start at the apex of society. It starts at the foundation of biological survival.
Yes.
Education and employment statistics are completely meaningless if the baseline healthcare system is failing women during their most physically vulnerable moments. Which brings us to the reproductive health data.
This acts as the ultimate stress test for their infrastructure.
Tell us about the maternal mortality ratio.
The MMR measures the number of women who die from pregnancy-related causes per 100,000 live births. It is widely considered one of the most sensitive indicators of a health system's overall functionality.
Okay, and globally.
The global average is a devastating 216.1.
Okay. But in Azerbaijan, the MMR is incredibly low. It's 40.8 deaths per 100,000 live births.
That is less than a fifth of the global average.
Wow.
Additionally, their adolescent birth rate, which measures births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19, sits at 34.8, favorably lower than the global 39.1.
Those maternal survival rates have to correlate directly to the overall life expectancy surge, right? Because life expectancy went from 62.75 years back in 1990 to 74.42 years in 2023.
They absolutely correlate, but the correlation goes deeper than just medical intervention in a hospital room.
Ooh, where else does it go?
The data interlocks perfectly here. Let's trace it back to the multidimensional poverty discussion we had earlier.
Right, the MPI.
We noted that infrastructural poverty, lack of sanitation and clean water, was practically zero. Those heavy state-level investments in foundational infrastructure are the direct mechanical cause of this biological triumph.
Oh, I see. You can't separate the plumbing from the mortality rate.
Exactly. When rural clinics have reliable electricity to maintain the cold chain for vital medications, and when homes have clean, treated water to prevent puerperal sepsis following childbirth, maternal mortality plummets.
Wow.
This isn't just a secondary benefit of economic growth, it is the country's strongest developmental moat. They have engineered a baseline of biological security that protects their population from the most regressive health shocks.
That is incredible. Okay, let's synthesize this matrix before we look at the final cost, because there is a cost.
There always is.
Right. So Azerbaijan has eradicated the physical environment of extreme poverty. They possess a highly efficient socioeconomic grid that minimizes inequality loss to under 7%. They are delivering world-class female education, and they have built a formidable biological moat protecting maternal health. It is a stunning turnaround from the economic devastation of 1995. But what is the bill for all this progress? Are they burning the earth to achieve these numbers?
It's the essential question of the 21st century.
Because we know the traditional macroeconomic playbook for rapid development, a middle-income nation digs up fossil fuels, burns them to fuel heavy industry, pollutes its rivers, spikes its carbon emissions, and drives its human development index up at the direct expense of its environment.
Right, the classic grow first, clean up later model of industrialization. It is the exact path taken by almost every high-income nation in the West.
So have they simply followed that destructive playbook to achieve these numbers? The data provides an answer through the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, the PHDI.
This is a vital metric.
Explain how it works.
This metric takes a country's standard human development index and imposes a penalty based on two factors: carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint per capita. It mathematically penalizes nations for ecological damage.
Okay, so what are the numbers?
The global PHDI loss rate is 10.05%. So the global community is effectively sacrificing a tenth of its development potential to environmental degradation.
And Azerbaijan?
Azerbaijan's PHDI loss rate is only 6.59%.
That's way lower. Furthermore, their per capita carbon emissions stand at 4.22 tons, which is below the global average of 4.54 tons. The combination of this environmental efficiency is just wild.
It really is.
When the UN calculates the global rankings and applies this planetary pressure penalty, Azerbaijan actually rises 27 places in the global rankings. 27 places.
It's a remarkable decoupling. Usually, rapid human development in middle-income nations demands massive carbon output.
Right, factories, cars.
Yes. You expect material footprints to skyrocket as a rising middle class buys more consumer goods, builds more concrete infrastructure, and demands more energy. Yet, Azerbaijan has managed to decouple its human development peak from severe environmental degradation. They are maintaining a higher HDI than the global average while putting less pressure on the planet than the global average.
Okay, I have to push back on the mechanics of this because the geopolitics of the region make this really counterintuitive.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Right. The Caspian Basin is historic hydrocarbon territory. Their economy has deep, undeniable ties to oil and natural gas extraction. How does a nation whose economic engine relies so heavily on fossil fuel extraction manage to keep its domestic per capita carbon emissions below the global average while simultaneously spiking its gross national income? Sounds contradictory.
It points to a critical distinction in environmental economics. It's the difference between export-driven resource wealth and domestic consumption patterns.
Oh, interesting.
A nation can generate high macroeconomic revenue by exporting energy to global markets. But the quality of growth depends entirely on how that revenue is deployed internally.
So they aren't burning the product in their own backyard to power inefficient domestic industries.
Exactly. The data implies a high degree of domestic efficiency. It suggests that oil revenues have been systematically reinvested into modernizing the domestic grid, establishing more efficient public transportation, and skipping the hyperpolluting phases of early industrialization.
Wow.
It proves a vital philosophical point to the rest of the developing world. The green premium does not have to act as a barrier to human development. You do not need an exploding domestic carbon footprint to eradicate extreme physical poverty and educate your population. You could generate wealth through natural resources without designing your domestic economy to be inefficiently consumptive.
It is a masterclass in macroeconomic balancing. If we were to build a definitive global dashboard for Azerbaijan based on this entire 1990 to 2023 analysis, the metrics are undeniable. You have a high human development index of 0.79. You have an extremely low inequality loss of just 6.8%. You have virtually eliminated multidimensional poverty at 0.001. You boast world-beating female education at 10.9 years. You maintain high maternal safety with an MMR of 40.8. And you accomplish all of this with a low planetary pressure penalty of 6.59%.
It's a dashboard any development economist would envy. And the initial question of our mission, whether this is a model or a paradox, has a clear answer in the data.
Which is?
It is a highly specific, highly effective model of quantitative development. They have entirely mastered the metrics of foundational human security.
Yeah.
However, transitioning from a middle-income success story to a high-income, fully actualized economy requires a massive strategic pivot.
Because the era of pouring the concrete foundation is over.
Exactly.
So what does the next 10 years look like based on these sources? They need a totally different architectural approach now.
The next decade must be defined by what I'd call the art of balance. The nation must transition from a quantitative lead to qualitative depth.
Going deep instead of wide.
Right. They have built the schools and successfully educated their female population. The immediate imperative now is to dismantle the structural, cultural, and institutional barriers that prevent those women from translating 10.9 years of education into executive wealth and proportional parliamentary power. The transition must move from simply providing input to ensuring equitable output.
And regarding the extreme floor of society, what about that 0.001?
They must deploy surgical, localized policy interventions to address the lingering nutrition and school attendance deficits hidden inside their otherwise stellar MPI score. When massive infrastructure is solved, poverty becomes incredibly specific. It requires nuanced social work, not just civil engineering.
That makes total sense.
Finally, as their wealth continues to compound, the temptation for the middle class to consume more aggressively will rise exponentially. They must aggressively protect that decoupling of wealth and carbon to maintain their green momentum.
What a journey. We've seen how an entire nation can recover from catastrophic economic collapse to virtually eliminate multidimensional poverty while keeping inequality under 7%. The socioeconomic grid they've built is honestly a marvel of distribution.
It really is a fascinating case study.
It is. But I want to leave you, listening at home or on your commute, with a final lingering question to ponder on your own. We see clearly from this report that a determined state can conquer extreme physical poverty. We see that a government can successfully build the infrastructure to protect maternal health and massively educate its female population, outpacing the world. But it begs a profound question for the entire global economy. If we have the capacity to lay the pipes, build the clinics, and fill the classrooms, why does a modern world still fail so spectacularly to translate undeniable female intelligence into equal wealth and structural power? Is the final frontier of human development not about building more schools, but about finally finding the courage to dismantle the invisible ceilings?